Hello, everyone. So I'm Alicia Behrman. I'm going to be our host for this discussion, and my other co-hosts they can introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Colleen Barclay. I am very excited for the discussion we are going to have today.
Hi, I'm Megan Benton. I am also very excited.
I'm Crystal Travers, and I'm looking forward to some stimulating conversation with you ladies as well.
Yes.
Okay. So our first question is, so we looked at a video from Nadine Burke, and we are wanting to know. I'm wanting to know what are your thoughts on the video?
Mm.
It was definitely eye-opening for me. I think what stood out most for me is a quote. I'll quote what she said: "There needs to be a change in every segment of society in the way we interact with children who are exposed to high doses of adversity." And this stood out for me because I actually have a student in my practicum school who experienced a violent act. Actually, his father was killed in his presence, and so some of the teachers are not very patient with him. And I think if they understood or if they even saw this video, they might have a different perspective on how to interact with him. This is a child who is not entering the classroom without a lot of prodding, and he doesn't feel comfortable going into a lot of the classrooms, and he doesn't. And so some of the teachers feel like he's receiving special treatment that he should not, and they're just not buying it. And so I think they just don't understand the severity of what he experienced. And certainly they don't understand that there's a true biological impact when children experience adverse experiences. So definitely a very impactful video for me, even as a parent, just thinking about how if I'm overreacting or if I'm not regulating my own emotions, how that can affect my children. I was just wondering, wow, maybe, I have caused my children to have some aces. So I'm definitely taking a lot away from the video.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Crystal. Oh, I'm sorry. But I agree too. When I was watching the video and she mentioned the 20-year difference in life expectancy from children who don't have ACEs and children who do, I'm like, we really need to take this more seriously because you only have one life. And if we could, impact these kids when they are younger so they can, be able to have those 20 extra years and be able to have a successful life, I think we should do so.
Yeah, definitely. I always say that stress kills, and this study, what she did, definitely supports that. And even I like what she mentioned about parents as well, needing some support in order for them to heal from their traumas because trauma can be intergenerational.
Yeah, I was also really shocked by the 20-year difference, because that's a huge number. Um, and I also have been somebody who, and she said it, I think, in the first half of her video, where it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. Somebody who's had a traumatic life, they see, drug use, kind of more behaviors that impact your health. So, of course, they may have health problems later on. Like, I definitely subscribe to that. So it was really eye-opening to see that, like, that's not all that it is. Like, just the trauma itself creates, like, or at least contributes to all these diseases. So that, like, really opened my eyes and changed my perspective, because while I did have compassion for people, the way I thought, I guess, that their behaviors developed is not, or how their health was impacted by their behavior is not necessarily, you know the way that I thought that it was. So that was
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
And initially I was thinking about, well, is it the chicken and egg situation where, well, is it the egg that comes first or the chicken that comes first? But after watching this video, totally that's not the case. Something biological is taking place when all the stress is being placed on the child. And it really made me think about prevention as far as parents really need to know this information when when you're carrying a child before that child is born. I think if I had known that, I would definitely check myself as far as how I respond to my children. And so I think it's important to make sure people are aware of how stress can impact the child's development.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I thought when they were talking about that this video really supports the intergenerational trauma that Seychelle was talking about in her presentation. And I know she said something about like not everybody believes in that, but I feel like this video and the ACEs and its impact on health, like if it affects your like the telomeres on the end of your DNA, like how does that not get passed down? You know? So I feel like it really supported that. And I think you're right that the parental awareness is a huge part because a lot of people wouldn't know.
And
Yeah.
I know with the parental awareness piece, I think as school psychologists and other individuals who are actually in the health field, we need to try to figure out those different characteristics of a child who is experiencing ACEs. So just some research that I was doing, when kids are a baby, if they have any type of growth delay or like cognitive delay or sleep disruption, those are like the early signs of having those ACEs. So actually just pinpointing, when those ACEs are happening, and also asthma. It's also one of those different characteristics. So that could be like our first step on trying to help these parents identify if their child is going through those ACEs.
Right. And then to add on to that, um, an example of trauma that a child can experience is at birth. It's been shown that separating a baby from its birth mom as soon as it's born, that can be very traumatic, and you can see the health implications that happen as a result of that. And also going off of what you ladies were saying about intergenerational trauma and how some people don't believe in it, it makes me think about Boykin's family systems theory because that's also in research. And he talks about how trauma and actually mental illnesses or just a lot of mental issues can be passed down or they can be more susceptible to being developed. Someone can be more at risk because their parent had some sort of mental issue. So also that goes into trauma. If a parent was experiencing some sort of traumatic event in their childhood, it can also be likely that that child, unfortunately, may experience some trauma from that parent because that parent may not have healed from their trauma and they may have developed some sort of developmental or mental issue which affects how their child is raised.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also something that I research how the different difficult when people have ACEs, how they can just pack on. Like, say you're a baby, you're going through these like growth delays, and then when you're in adolescence, you have these behavior problems, and then when you're grown, you're having like teen pregnancy or obesity and all those other cognitive delays you experience with as an adult. Like, it just keeps going on and on and on. You get it from the parent, and then you go through those different stages of experiencing, the negative side of having those ACEs. So
It's a snowball effect.
yes.
Yeah. And part of me also wonders, like talking about COVID and how that affects trauma.
Mm-hmm.
When like looking at the different types of trauma, like I was thinking like COVID could, for some people, could be considered like a chronic trauma because it's been going on for so long with nobody really has an end in sight. And then you also have kids who are at home, for a whole year on quarantine when everything shut down and experiencing, maybe their parents' stress from losing a job, or if they live in an abusive home, like they don't have school as a safe place. So I feel like COVID has really impacted the amount of children who have ACEs now than maybe even before COVID.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's just about COVID as a, disease. It's the implications of COVID.
Mhm.
So all of, some parents lost their jobs, and some students, they were homeless for a certain amount of time. They may still be homeless even. So a lot of different aspects affected them, and they're probably just really scared, especially certain communities. And that's where I think the community of diversity comes in that, Dr. Burke talked about, because for certain communities, it was worse than others. For example, the Black community. They were, one, scarred from other past community diversities, I believe, such as the Tuskegee experiments. So they weren't really welcome to, I found that some of them weren't welcome to a vaccine or, a treatment, because they were worried that some of that past trauma might come back, where the US tried to harm them. So I was like, oh no. But,
I
community.
know, I know for me, Colleen, you and Megan made good points, but I know recently we've been looking at COVID as like a bad thing, but I hate COVID's happening. It had all these negative effects, but I'm actually kind of glad it happened because teachers are actually able to see in students' live when they were on camera, like how those ACEs are, in the home. And it actually opened up a lot of educators' eyes, like, oh, students do go through a lot of things before they even step into the door. So it actually brought some type of awareness to show, like, hey, I really need to incorporate, some different strategies so students can, become resilient.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. I did want to bring up one thing that I was researching. I just like to look at like different sides of things. So I was looking and I found this article that was talking about the strengths, limitations, and misapplications of ACE scores. And so I just wanted to know like what you guys kind of thought. So basically this article was written in 2020. And it basically talks about how the ACE score, it's not a standardized measure of childhood exposure to the biology of stress, but that it was designed in order to research. Like in the ACEs study, it was designed purely for research, not for screening, and that it's not predictive at the individual level. Like an example that this article gave was that, a person with an ACE score of 1, they could have experienced intense, chronic, and unrelenting exposure to one type of abuse, whereas somebody with maybe 3, it was more tangential, not as frequent, not as intense. So basically the manifestations and the effects of that trauma can be different. So I know that in the video they talk about using ACE scores as a screener. So I was just wondering what you guys kind of thought about that idea.
I agree. I think we should use ACE scores as a screener because as future school psychologists, we're giving the WISC or anything else, and some of those tests are trying to figure out if students have ADHD. And an effect of ACEs is having being mislabeled for ADHD. So I think to get more research and more information on the child while we're giving the WISC or all the Connors, we need to give the ACE screener just to see. Because we shouldn't just go off of like our own interpretation of things. We should really look into all the facts.
Yeah, I think ACEs is a good first step because, as she said, if someone even hints that they had a child experience 1 ACEs, then that just leads to further questions. And so it's not really saying, oh, this child is so traumatized just because they experienced 1 ACEs. It's more like this child might be traumatized. Let's see the degree of, how that trauma or non-trauma is manifesting.
Yeah, I think the key word is screener. They're not saying that it's a diagnostic measure. So I think it's definitely a screener. And, if they want to make something that's more research-based, that'd be great. But we definitely want to screen. And from there, we're referring. That's what's supposed to happen. It's just to know whether or not the child or teen should be referred. So I think it's a valid point, and maybe they will do further research and create something that can be used as a
Yeah.
diagnostic.
My,
I-
I'm sorry. My only thing with the screener, I think is a good thing, but I'm just trying to figure out because some people have a problem addressing their ACEs. So, what could be like an appropriate way to say, do I have ACEs? Because some people look at it as a deficit and not like a way to like help the students. So I'm just trying to figure out, do you guys have any type of way that could be like more appropriate and not considered maybe embarrassing to whoever is like filling or doing the screener?
I think it just makes sure, I think to make certain that people are trained properly as to how to use it. For example, she talked about, she even has a script that she uses to share with practitioners who give the screener, and just making sure that they're trained properly, because the parents are supposed to fill it out. And I think the way it's set up, you don't have to put a check by each indicator, just a number of how many indicators your child has experienced. So like if it says physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, at the bottom, you would just put, my child experienced one of those. So that's the way I interpreted it, so that people would feel comfortable being honest. And then also sort of to expand on what you were saying, there's another article that was written in 2015 that talks about how the screener doesn't account for things that can be stressors, such as racial discrimination, or things that only minoritized people would experience. So that's something else to think about. But I still think the screener is a great place to start, and everyone should be using it. And hopefully pediatricians know about it.
Yeah, I think, Crystal, that is a good point as to like, because we always, have it's been stressed that we need to choose culturally responsive assessments. So I think that, yeah, just being aware of how it is used and who it was, I don't know if it was normed on or, whoever it was developed for, I think that definitely taking that into account when looking at the results. And as far as Alicia's question, I think that partially it goes along with the environment that you make, building rapport with the person who's filling it out, making sure they understand the confidentiality of it. I kind of think about that when like some of the students are filling out the Connors rating scale with my supervisor, because sometimes they ask her to just read the questions and they'll just respond, and like some of those questions are kind of personal, but they like have no problem doing it, but and just saying the answers out loud in front of us. But I think it's because you create that safe atmosphere. So I think that is an important factor, if you're doing the screening.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah, I definitely agree as well. I know one technique that I see being used whenever you want to make someone more comfortable before you ask a question, and we learned this in research methods, it's to say, sometimes everyone experiences a difficult time in their life. And so I wanted to know, have you ever experienced a difficult time in your life? And it's just yes or no. Or, you don't have to get too specific, but just, making it seem more normalized, sort of like how we think mental health and therapy is being more normalized now. It's not as touchy of a topic as it was, say, 20 years ago. It's not taboo. You're not seeing a shrink anymore. So, being able to first discuss these things and get it out in the open, because trauma, you break your leg. It's a you know, physical boo boo, but no one wants to address any mental boo boos ever. So I feel like this is a way to start addressing those mental boo boos, because they should be treated just as much as the physical ones.
I think that also the way that like knowing now after watching Dr. Burke's video, like a lot of people do understand more the physical effects. So if you can kind of educate people on, trauma's not just in your minds, like you can actually have physical, visible health effects. I think that that can help kind of get people on board because I think people definitely, if it's visible, then they understand more and kind of take it more seriously. So I feel like that's another avenue of just understanding those biological effects.
Yeah. It's incredible that you say it's more visible. I'm sorry, Alicia. It's incredible that you say it's more visible because I was thinking about it as you said it. A lot of doctors just treat what's visible, but then we don't even realize that something invisible that caused it to be visible, if you get what I'm saying. So I feel like the way we've been practicing medicine for hundreds of years, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, wow, this whole time we could have gotten more to the source of the issue to sort of prevent all of these physical manifestations of a mental illness. So.
And I know for me, just watching my practicum supervisor do counseling sessions, I think you don't have to go into details with like students, but I think being vulnerable with them and, just letting them know that they're not alone, because even though we're the professional in the situation, we could be experiencing ACEs as well. And if we are experiencing those ACEs, being vulnerable with the students and it's letting them know that you're not alone, there's nothing that's wrong with you. I mean, it's just something, that happens in life. So.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have another question, and we probably already answered it, but why should ACEs be taken seriously in the school setting?
I think because the development of trauma can vary. And so a child can experience something, but it doesn't have to have a negative impact on them as far as outcomes, depending on the level of support that they have and like the ecological fit that's in their community, their support network work. So if the family can respond appropriately, we can help with that, finding resources, using a social worker or the mental health professionals in the community. If the school can respond, we can help with that. We can educate the teachers and the administrators that they might need to be flexible with the student and that this child has experienced true trauma. They're not just trying to get out of class, and just finding resources for them in their community. So I think those are all ways that we can help and lessen the impact of that adverse childhood experience.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. Oh, sorry. I was thinking that getting support to the student as soon as possible, as soon as that they experienced an ACEs, that would help mitigate that trauma that could happen as an aftermath. Because, at first, even if 30 students experience the same event, they may not experience the same level of trauma. They could all have been in the schoolhouse fire, but 10 of them could be completely fine and move along with their life as if nothing happened, and 20 of them could have some degree of trauma that follows, which could be not too severe or extremely severe and debilitating. So I think
resilience.
Yeah, exactly. So getting that support to them as soon as possible, like just letting them know where they can go or what they should do next or what the family should do next, then I feel like that's a huge step already in the right direction.
I agree with that. I think also, they say that the caregiver can be like a biological buffer against like toxic stress and all. So I think that stresses the importance too of like the school, family, community partnerships to really try to help support the child, not just in school, but also at home. And in the community, kind of, Crystal, what you were saying, like making sure that you're providing support for parents too, because they are really the main person who can help, lessen the impact of ACEs on their children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know when I think of ACEs, I think of Maslow hierarchy of needs. So if we can start addressing those needs, that students have and also that parents have, because students are a reflection of their parents. I think that would be a good way that we could decrease those ACEs that students experience.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
So our last and final question. So as future school psychologists, what are ways that we can help prevent ACEs, and what are some things we can put in place in the schools to help students with ACEs?
So one thing that comes to mind for me was the 6 most helpful interventions that Dr. Beck talked about was like sleep, exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, mental health, and healthy relationships. And like looking at those, it's kind of hard to do the sleep portion at school, but I feel like exercise, even nutrition, really, all the other ones are actually really doable in the school, at least to kind of provide some sort of, mindfulness or, mental health, like counseling, exercise, like having kids exercise or teaching them the benefits of exercise, and just awareness of those things too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the schools can help with exercise and sleep. When we look at some of the time starts of the different schools, they can lower those time starts, and also the amount of homework that they're allowed to give. Those things at least will make it possible for students to get more sleep. And then also with exercise, PE is not required. I don't think it's required in high school past ninth grade. And really, they should be exercising every year, every week. They should be involved in some type of physical exercise. So those are things that we could possibly advocate for as far as policy changes. I was just thinking about that when you mentioned exercise and sleep. Educators
Really good idea.
can also help with that.
Yeah.
And I know, I feel like a few things we can do to help students with ACEs is hiring more professionals in the school systems. Because I know you have your social workers and you have your teachers and your school psychologists, but I know they are already spread a little thin. So maybe we could have a social worker and a school psychologist for every school, or maybe have like a trauma training, like train the teachers on how to deal with students with ACEs. And maybe we could even gather or create, like some more resources for those children and the families in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. We need more personnel or mental health personnel in the schools. And I wouldn't even stop at one school psychologist and one social worker. I think that in the future, perspective 20 to 50 years, who knows, there could be two school psychologists at least in each school, or, multiple social workers, multiple counselors, multiple mental health professionals who can support these students and their families, and even staff at the school.
Mm-hmm. Something else that I was reading more like classroom focused was that I actually thought it was interesting was that maintaining high standards is high like academic standards is actually suggested for children who have experienced trauma. They say that like basically it seems like making it easier on them is helpful, but it actually can like hurt their self-worth. And that they say that a good way to avoid doing that, but also making them feel successful is like to identify like their like competencies. Like if they're really good at math, then like trying to incorporate that into other subjects somehow, basically like to find what they're good at and then try to build on that to make them feel successful while also making them feel like you're not dumbing down the content because, pitying them basically. I just found that interesting because I think a lot of people think, oh, like we'll make it easier for you, but that's not necessarily always helpful.
Right. I don't see a lot of high schoolers taking those accommodations either when it comes to doing less work. They're like, no, I don't want to have to just write 3 sentences. I want to write a paragraph like everyone else.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's a balance,
Mm-hmm.
So what do you all think about having a separate disorder for children who have experienced adverse effects, because there's a researcher who wanted to create a category called developmental trauma disorder. Do you think that makes sense? Because I'm thinking sometimes the school psychologist is facing a dilemma. They know this child experienced trauma, violence, but they don't want to label them as ED, but it's just a lot going on, and they can't put them in really any category,
very
legitimately.
Yeah, we should.
I was just saying that's very interesting. I never thought about that.
I feel like we should create a category for students who experience ACEs, because it's either, to be honest, either OHI if they have like ADHD, or it's ED. And that's not really like addressing the problem. So we create their own category, we'll be able to, address the better.
In my opinion, I lean towards no, because when you look at the statistics, there are so many children who have experienced trauma, and it's like, at what level do you cut it off? You have to have 4 ACEs and then you qualify, or just 1? Like, I think it's kind of difficult to say there. And then I feel like because there's such a big population of children who are affected, that I feel like creating trauma-informed schools is a better way to deal with the problem, rather than categorizing them. And it's so many kids, like, I feel like just the sheer numbers that you hear about, I feel like it's better to kind of more implement a trauma focus in the general curriculum.
I definitely see why someone may want a category. I feel like I need to do more research on this to form a full opinion, but I feel like I don't know, like what I lost my train of thought, so someone can talk.
Well, okay, why are you thinking? So I'm thinking that it would at least allow their situation to be more accurately portrayed, and then to make sure that people are being sensitive to their needs and their prior experience, and that they don't get pushed into having a conduct disorder. The young man that I know who, his father was killed in the same house and he was there, he's not violent or aggressive at all. He's very withdrawn. But you would think maybe some other children, they would respond differently. Maybe they're angry, defiant. And so to put them into, a school for children who are defiant, when really they experience a really traumatic experience, I just feel like they would receive the type of services that they actually need, as opposed to being improperly categorized or labeled inappropriately. So I would rather them, if they're going to have a label, I'd rather that label be appropriate and cause other people to meet their needs, so that they would get that counseling. Whoever their caregiver is, they may need counseling as well, and whatever supports they need. So I want to make sure they get support, and I want to make sure they get the right support. I'm not happy about labeling them, but if that's going to keep them from, being put at some type of school where they don't belong, and I don't want them to have to be taken out of their neighborhood or out of their community to go to a school either. So I just would want to, be able to give them the support, and once they have the diagnosis, unfortunately, then they can get all the support that they need. So I would like that.